this computer. Okay, just again, getting confirmation that everybody's okay with me recording this. It'll be put up on the my YouTube account. So we're here today for part 2 of my seminar on simplifying suggestibility, which I believe is really the heart of self-improvement. And so I was motivated to present this because I thought that the concept of suggestibility in Kapp-Assinian therapy is kind of overloaded. There's a lot of subtle meanings of it, and it's become really focused on EMP. But I think that originally Dr. Kappas really saw this as being about the reason that people have the problems they have is because they are suggestible to them. And EMP is a big part of that. And in relationship therapy, the reason you have problems in relationship is because of EMP. And I think that over time, and particularly for pedagogical reasons, when you're bringing people in and teaching them how to be hypnotists and how to make proper suggestions and things like that, this was very important. And so they focused on EMP suggestibility, but there's other meanings of it as well. And so the outline of the course, it was that, I'm going to talk about this overloading, this terminal logical hypersuggestibility, and expose different meanings. And then I introduced a view of personality, and I'll summarize that when I go through the couple of slides I'm going to focus on right now. But the next step was to actually begin to look at this larger concept, taking all these concepts of suggestibility and putting them into one focused statement of what hypnotherapeutic suggestibility was. Okay, and that's where we ended last time, was with the conclusion of that introduction of those concepts. What I'm going to focus on today is that we have all these other meanings of suggestibility, and so we need some new terminology. And in introducing that terminology, I'm going to actually talk a little bit about, as we go through it, why I chose the terminology. Dr. Kappas chose the terminology he did. It was kind of like he was trying to understand the therapeutic outcomes that he was seeing, and he was really focused on therapeutic outcomes. He wasn't necessarily focused on kind of philosophical issues of, does this cover all the possibilities? Okay, he was really focused on pragmatic therapeutic outcomes. And so I'm going to back up a little bit, and I'm going to add some superstructure on these things. It's not super complicated, even though I'm using the big 10-cent words. It's not super complicated, and it should be fairly intuitive. And so we'll focus on that, and then we're going to step back. That's going to be the stuff from modern psychology and what modern psychology has brought us about human behavior and human personality, and some of the subtle issues that we get into in therapy, particularly the issue of neurosis. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit in the context of attachment theory and authority, which we already know from stages of development. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to introduce the concept of hristosis and hristotherapy. And I'm going to go back to the Vedic chakras. And I'm going to explain why the Vedic chakras are the way that they are. Believe it or not, they make perfect sense once you think about how people develop and the problems that infants have to solve if they're going to be effective actors in the world. And so from that perspective, there's also a framework that I've put together, which I won't go into in a lot of detail today, that relates this to the journey of the subconscious and our relationships to the subconscious. And it leads into an endpoint, which I find to be very powerful to my clients. Okay, again, you can get people focused on trying to undo their suggestibility, on trying to be immune to the influences that cause them to have the problems that they have. But it's always far more powerful to give people a positive outcome. And for those that attended my theory of mind, what I offered is the positive outcome is an endpoint in personal development where you reunite your mind. Okay, and the subconscious and conscious minds are no longer divided. You don't need the critical mind anymore because you've brought harmony between your personality and the world in which you live in. Okay, and when I share this vision with people, they say, forget that old garbage. Okay, I want to go over here. Take me over there. Okay, and it ends up making therapy a very different process for me. Okay, so that's the goal for today. Just going back again, We had talked about that there's a guide to hypnotic syntax, which is that if they're an emo or a fizz, you use different words. There was hypnotic depth, which is a hypnagogic, catatonic, and somnambulistic states, which enable you to get to different levels of the personality and to create suggestibility in different places. But there's also this persistence issue, which is that when we have a crisis, our subconscious gets exposed, it internalizes the crisis, the behavior patterns of the crisis, it becomes defensive, it ruminates, and it compensates with all kinds of other behaviors later on down the road. And so what we have to do is unpeel the onion as we go into therapy. So I introduced this idea of personality, as I said, and this idea that the way that we go about in the world affects three things that we should really explore in therapy with our clients: the circumstances they're in, their capabilities, and their character. And I'll elaborate a little bit more on how this unfolds in therapy later on down the road. Okay. So we talked about hypnotherapeutic suggestibility. Given all of this, and it's very important to recognize the difference between reactions, which are things that are in the subconscious, which are automatic, with responses, which are things that when we're in a new situation, we think things through, we reason about it, we say, this is what would work best in this situation. Okay. And so what we're doing in therapy is we're trying to replace reactions with responses. And there was two aspects to this. It's why we have problems. It's because reactively doing what we always do no longer serves us. And as well, on top of that, is we get into relationships that compensate for our reactions. So now we've got people surrounding upon us that depend upon us to behave in the way that we've always been behaving. And that makes it really hard to change our behavior. And this is part of what Dr. Kappas focused on in EMP therapy. It's also how hypnotherapy solves them, which is that if we're going to get new behaviors in, okay, the subconscious mind counts on the conscious mind to tell it what's going to work in the outside social world. And so if we build rapport and we do a good job with discovery and the cognitive portion, come up with a good, strong ideas that the client believes will work for them and that validate them as people and their self-concept, then whenever they get to the point of needing to do something different, the subconscious is going to say, are you sure you really want to do this? And the conscious mind is going to say, yeah, let's do this. And it's going to go ahead and do it. So the first thing is the conscious mind ratifies it. The second thing is that our well-being improves. Everything is linked to our organic well-being, ultimately. Okay. So if these two things work, the social reality is aligned with the organic well-being, then the subconscious will go along. And the interesting thing about this, I pointed out, is that this means that self-improvement trumps social acceptance. And we don't have control over those relationships that we're in. We can't expect people to be happy with what we do. We got to prepare the client for this. Okay. And what's important is that you improve yourselves, and then they have the opportunity to deal with their issues. Guide them forward. Okay. But you take the first step. And when they see how fun it is for you, how good you feel about the changes that are happening to you, maybe they'll get help too. Okay. So this is now the model of personality that in Kapas-Union therapy, we're trying to empower the client to be more bidirectionally suggestible to their self. So this is not just the conscious mind telling the subconscious what to do. It's this conscious mind being receptive to messages coming from the subconscious that this isn't working for us, boss. I'm getting tired. I'm getting worn out. The body's breaking. Listen to me. Something's got to change. Okay. So this is a bidirectional process. Okay. And so it involves perception, self-perception. So when we go into therapy and we do the body scan, we do the progressive relaxation, where they're paying attention to every single part of their body, we are increasing their self-perception. Interpretation in the cognitive portion. Why are you doing this? How does it help? How does it serve you? Okay. Is there any other situations where this happens? Okay. If you are in this situation, what kinds of capacities could you have in yourself that might enable you to overcome this? So rather than interpreting it as something that's wrong with them, looking at it as an opportunity to explore new modes of self-expression. Okay, so we do a lot of reinterpretation of their experience, of their perceptions. We prioritize. I mentioned dream therapy, where we tell them, and when they're in trance, and every night in dreams, your subconscious will consider and elaborate upon the opportunities that exist now that you have accepted that manifesting these qualities of yourself, this confidence, this whatever the heck it is, will create greater opportunities for you. The subconscious will dream every night about that. And any old memories, any past experiences that inhibit the realization of these opportunities in the dreams just before waking in the morning, they'll just be released and vented out. So you're changing the priorities. We're shifting priorities from avoiding negative outcomes to grasping positive outcomes. Very important part of Kappa-Cinean therapy. And then we're changing processes. We're getting the subconscious into a state where it's having experience of going on a plane, and imagine going on a plane and it's not getting frightened. Okay, we're changing the way we're getting people to practice or to rehearse in their subconscious actual experiences and establishing contexts where they now have new options. We're giving them responses to things that they've chosen. Let's do it this way instead of the old way. We're injecting that response and overriding their reactions. The way that I think I put it was we depotentiate their reactions and we activate their responses. So this summarizes kind of the picture of therapy that we have. Okay, so now we've got this concept of suggestibility. We see how it relates to the overall Kappa-Cinean process of therapy. This should not be kind of like too distant for anybody here. Okay, I mean, this is recognizably Kappa-Cinean therapy. And I think that this is what Dr. Kappas, when he was establishing his program, this is what was important to him. He felt that the subconscious was at the heart of so much of the challenges that people had in human behavior, and that they had the problems they had because they were suggestible to them. Okay, and so this is the framework. All I've done is add some terminology around the framework, but this is the concept that he had. So now let's step back and say, okay, so that's suggestibility. Now let's enshrine that and say that that's the meaning of suggestibility from a hypnotherapeutic perspective. Let's step back and let's look at some of these other things. Okay, so hypnotic syntax. This is a fascinating topic. You know, people recommend Hammond's Handbook of Hypnotic Suggestions. It's something that should be in all of our bookcases because it's got specific symptoms, and you can go and you can look up specific suggestions. There we go. You get somebody in trance, you give them the specific, you just read the suggestion out of the book, and lo and behold, you solve their problem. Okay. But what I was not prepared for when I began reading that book cover to cover, as I tend to do, is that chapter 2. And what happened was that, you know, Erickson established the American Society of Clinical Hypnotists. And these guys did a lot of studies about how to do hypnotherapy. And one of them concerns inferred versus direct suggestions, because there was a lot of controversy about this. And there was this thing about, you know, Ericksonian syntax and how you had to make your suggestions indirect and everything like that. And they did some real studies about all this. And what they found was that inferred suggestions can be initially more effective. But once effective rapport is established, direct suggestions are always better. And so the thing that's kind of curious about this is, you know, you can always get inferred suggestions a la Kappa-Cinean, you know, emo suggestibility. You can always get them to work. Okay. It seemed my inference from this is that the EMP suggestibility is only important in the initial stages of therapy. Okay, and I can feel this happening as I get into like my 6th session with a high emo, which is I say the word you, or I talk directly about their body or something like that. And where I used to feel this resistance, it's kind of like, no, that's okay, just keep on going. You know, I get it now. I don't need to be afraid of my body anymore. I've done the progressive relaxation enough times. I'm no longer scared of it. So it's just kind of an interesting shift. Okay. So be a little, don't, I think that this creates some freedom here. I spend a lot of time worrying about this. I spend a lot of time worrying about not using no or not in suggestions. The formulation I gave you about dream therapy, it took me a long time to get to that, and I still screw it up and say releasing those things that do not contribute, or it's just really hard. So this is in response to that. Now, there was also this thing about NLP syntax, which is focusing on auditory, visual, or kinesthetic imagery. And I think that this probably actually follows infant sensory bias. Okay, that you have mothers that carry their children and touch them all the time. And so you activate those pathways, and everything that they learn now is grounded on those pathways. And the brain is a feedback mechanism. So when you say no now, and they get told no, that's just not a finger waving or something like that, or batting, or something being taken away from their visual field. They feel it very deeply in their bodies, because that no is fed back into the physical sensibility. Okay, so everything gets built on top of these most sensitive pathways from very earliest infancy. Same thing with, if the child is not picked up very much, but kind of propped up in a little chair and can watch mommy walking back and forth, they may be more visual. Okay, their information processing is founded upon their visual system. And if they're left in a situation where they spend a lot of time just looking up at the ceiling in a crib, they may be very, very sensitive to auditory cues. And what I do find myself needing to do sometimes for people who have got really early childhood trauma is to try to get them to bring in the other sensory channels. And I do this a lot with this confusion thing where I'm doing left and right, and I put it like, whether it's the person to the left you is the right one, but that means that the person to the right you is the one that is left to consider, and it's kind of this image of these two people that they're looking back and forth at, which person do you want to be with? And then the same thing with the auditory, where you may hear a sound over there or a sound over, on one side or the other side, and just trying to get them into the point where they're taking charge of these things. Okay, so I would just leave hypnotic syntax as hypnotic syntax. It's whatever works for the specific client. And this is an area that we have to be sensitive to, but I don't think that that you need to use the words suggestibility to deal with this. I think that just talking about syntax is fine. Okay, now that we got relationship dynamics. Okay. And the terminology that I evolve is I've got in my foundation, my concept of relationship dynamics is sociability, which is about how we establish space for ourselves. And this is EMP sexuality, how we project ourselves into the world. And Campus had a big blind spot, which is that isn't everything. There's also nurturance, which is defining space for others. And that a good relationship is a dance between these two components. We assert ourselves and we see how much our partner is willing to go along with us. And then we step out of the way and give them an opportunity to lead. Okay, and this is the dance of a relationship. It's about sociability and nurturance at the same time. And the words that I like to use for sociability are an adventurer, which is somebody who goes out and seeks opportunities, and protector, which is more focused on accumulation of resources and assets. And I've talked about this in several of the forums here. The adventurer is basically the fizz. The protector is the emo and the sexuality. I find that adventure protector are far more accessible to clients. They just say, yeah, okay, I see that. And there's value in both sides in a relationship. Okay, the adventurer creates sensation in the relationship. The protector is concerned with building value in the relationship. And you need that adventure to go out and find resources for the protector to organize and accumulate. So there's this dynamic, this mutually beneficial dynamic. So in terms of the choice of terminologies, both is a positive role, and it's kind of very natural in terms of this as the complementary dynamic, and it seems to be very, very comfortable for people. While emo and fizz have to do with how people deal with crisis, as opposed to how they deal with complementary benefits in the relationship. Nurturance, I use the words masculine and feminine, and we all hear the fathers complain about Mother's Day and about how everybody's happy about Mother's Day and wants to go out and have pancakes with mom. and the truth of that is that mothers are very supportive. This is part of what submitting to a 9-month parasitic invasion is all about, which is you give of yourself and you create a context in which, given the capacities of the person, they are able to explore new possibilities for themselves. It's a very gentle, supportive role. I think this is why elementary, a lot of teachers, and especially in the elementary school, where there tend to be a lot of women there. Okay, they're really good at doing this. Okay, it's seeing the possibilities in children and creating conditions under which they can manifest those possibilities. The masculine perspective is one of conformance. They look at the world and they say, in order for you to be successful in this situation, you damn well better be able to do this. Okay, so they're not so popular. They're kind of like the baseball bat up the side of the head. You get this, if you fail, you're never gonna go to college. Now, I use the words masculine and feminine because these are not gender roles. These are perceptions. And I have clients who are lesbian and they're in a wonderful relationship, and they recognize masculine and feminine, and they recognize the adventurer and protector in terms of the dynamics of how the relationship is organized. We might kind of tend to normalize masculine adventurism, but it doesn't have to be that way. Most people in the military are actually masculine protectors, believe it or not. And when you get a masculine adventurer, they frag them because they're creating too much danger. This is what happened to this guy Tillman, this football star who went off to Afghanistan. He was actually done in by his own platoon because he was just putting them in too much danger. And they were tired of trying to bail him out. You might think that a feminine protector would be more natural, but there are feminine adventurers. It's just really the individual. But I find that this just adds a little bit more understanding. It creates the sense of, as I said, this dance between sociability and nurturance, that there are these different styles of nurturance. And so obviously in this situation, we have the adventurous mother watching TV with her daughter, and they're laughing together, and the dad's there being the masculine protector with his laptop doing his work, and so there's an image of that, and that's not unfamiliar to us. Okay, and I find this with my clients as well. So this is moving away. This is taking EMP sexuality, which drove into EMP suggestibility. Okay, and it's just, and here's the terminology that I recommend. I find very helpful, that I eventually evolve. And this is why I made these choices. Okay, but still, underneath this, we have conditioning. Okay, there's kind of cultural patterns and things that are inherent to our nature that have to do with the way that we want relationships. But we've also got relationships with our parents that get brought forward into our future. And naturally, if you have an adventurous primary caretaker that takes their child onto the roller coaster at age 2, that's going to take a little protective, instill a little bit of protectiveness in that child who's always wondering what's mommy going to do next or whatever, or if you've got a overly protective dad, you know, hovering all the time and always intervening and telling you what to do. Well, you know, and they've always got the EpiPens and the sandwiches and everything. You never really get hurt, and you're always chafing at the restraints, and you want to go off and have some adventures because you're tired of being told to do all the time and being overly protected. You know, so obviously these things work together in the same way that EMP does. But the psychologists have found that there are non-normal situations. Okay. And that it's very important to understand this. And one of the big confusions that occurred was explaining why people are emotionals or why people are physicals in the 101 series. It was just incredibly confusing, and every teacher had a different answer. Okay, so let's just look at this now from the perspective of psychology and what the psychologists have come up with. So first of all, we have conditioning with our family. It's not a decision that we make. It's not something that we made it with. It's not a response. The way that we react to our family members is not a response. It is low-level conditioning. So that means it's established at a point in our lives where we have to make effort to get down and modify those behavior patterns. Excuse me, Ben, you're unmuted right now. Is there a question? Okay. So the psychologists find that there's two issues, two sets of issues here. One is attachment. And attachment is related to the survival stage, to the trust stage, and the stages of development. And it's really about, is the primary caregiver's mother available to me? And can I act independently from her? Or am I totally bound to her? Am I totally dependent upon her? Okay, so there's this desire to begin to move away. That leads eventually into authority, and this is in stage 4 of stages of development, which is self-determination. And we're looking at how does the secondary caregiver, the father, command respect, and do I receive his approval? And so we have this hypothetical little girl going through this process in her family, and the conclusion that I draw is children are far more flexible than parents are, physically, that is. Okay, and just remembering that this is the context in terms of the theory of mind, that we have experiences, we have these two emotional responses, fear and euphoria, okay, that sort our negatives and our positive knowns. And then our parents are up there trying to fill our thinking mind up with the ability to balance these things out. We don't want to be the child that goes and tastes the frosting on every single cupcake at the party, looking for the one that's just perfect, okay? And we don't want to be the child that hides under the bed when the guests come, okay? We've got to have balance between these two things, okay? So this is the stage of development. This is in terms of the theory of mind, this is where we're at. So here's attachment assessment that the psychologists run. So you have a parent with a child, and they're going to a room with a stranger and toys. The child settles in and begins to play with the toys, is encouraged to play with the toys. So they start playing with the toys. Then the parent leaves and re-enters after 10 minutes. And there's 4 basic responses. And I have to apologize because I always get really heartbroken about this. Okay, so if I get a little bit kind of like shaky here, just understand that that's why. 60% of children manifest what's called secure attachment. The parent leaving is a cause of concern. They come back in, they go back and they show them some affection, they reconnect them, we connect to them, and they return to play. This is 60% of all children. 15% are avoidant. They just ignore the parent and continue to play. 10% are contingent. They make a big emotional scene to command the parent's attention. And this is the one that breaks my heart. 15% of all children are disorganized. They panic and they don't know what to do. They will move toward the parent and then fall down and try to go back to play and they start crying. They don't know what to do. So what they found is that attachment is diagnostic, that actually adult behavior patterns follow from these attachment characteristics, okay? And you can tell how the child's going to turn out based upon where the mother's at in terms of her life. And secure attachment is not neurotic. So in a secure, the mother's supportive, the child is engaged, it's not neurotic, and our sociability adventure protector is going to be primarily driven based upon how capable the child feels about what it is that they're doing. And you talk to a lot of, when I was at the graduation, the 50th graduation, and I was at the dinner table with a couple that was very nearly somnambulistic. And they said, yeah, you know, sometimes I'm the emo and sometimes she's the emo, you know. But the primary thing about this is it's not neurotic, which means that if you point out to somebody, you know, this is a problem in this situation, you need to be a little bit more adventurous, okay? They'll say, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, I understand that. Let me see if I can do something different next time. They're reasonable about it. They see it as a choice. The other three categories are neurotic. And what that means, what neurotic means, is that when somebody points out that they're behaving in a way that's hurting them, they justify their behavior. Okay, they get into building rationalizations for it. So the avoidant child, the mother is self-involved. And so the child, you know, she doesn't get around and change the diaper when the child needs it. Okay. And what happens is the child mistrusts love. They get told that they're loved, but they're uncomfortable. They tend to have all the characteristics of the high emo. They have very low body sensation. They're just cutting off that source of information. Okay, this doesn't work for me. I need to not pay attention to this. So they become a neurotic protector. So this is like, you know, 70% and higher. Contingent, the mother is distracted. She does care, but she's just got a lot on her mind. And so if the child makes a scene and injects a lot of emotional energy into her world, she will respond and give them attention. This is a neurotic adventurer. And in adult life, they will, with their children, they will be really engaged with them until the child tests a boundary, and then they will explode and scream at them and be very hostile to them because their investment of energy is not being reciprocated. The investment of respect and caring is they're being pushed beyond their limits. The child doesn't know this. The child becomes confused by that, but they become neurotically risk-seeking. This is how you get attention from the world, is to be too adventurous, is to get yourself hurt or in trouble. That's how you get attention. Okay, so this is 10%. Disorganized, the mother is actually threatening. The child is confused and doesn't know what to do. The mother amplifies situations. This is kind of the inverse of the contingent thing where the child amplifies. The mother amplifies everything. Oh my gosh, you fell off and you broke a tooth, you're gonna die. Okay, we have to rush you to the hospital now. Okay, and everything's just a huge drama. This is also neurotic, and actually the sociability in this case is just unstable. And this is a situation where in all likelihood, you know, this is a child who's growing up with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, who's going to have challenges with addictions, unstable relationships, sexual promiscuity, and things like that. This is where this all leads on down. Okay, and so this is quite possibly a situation where we might find ourselves referring these kind of people out, these kind of clients out, if you see this kind of, if you have this kind of history in their past. Okay, otherwise there's a lot of work to be done in terms of building up their self-concept, which I'll talk about later on. Yes, Steve.
I know, I understand contingent to mean contingent on something else as to whether it happens or not, or whether it's supplied or not? How do you mean contingent here?
It's that the attachment is contingent. The attachment to the mother is contingent. They feel that the mother is there as long as they make a big enough scene.
Got it.
In the avoidant case, the attachment is just there's no attachment to mother at all, okay, or to the parent at all. There's just no attachment. Okay, so that's avoidant. Okay. And the big challenge that we have quite often is the problem of false equivalence, which is that these people get into relationships, right? Remember this issue of compensation, which is they get into relationships and the partner has to figure out how to deal with this behavior. And Kappas would talk about a relationship being stable because the two parties were equally neurotic. You know, you get these high emo and high phys, 70-70, 75-80, whatever the heck it was, on the two sides. Okay, and he said this relationship is neurotic enough that it works. Don't blow it up, he would tell people. Don't try to fix these people. Okay, they're where they're at because they chose to be here. Okay, you have to teach them how to recognize each other's behaviors and accept that this is what I chose because of who I am. Okay, that was kind of the way that he worked with things. He didn't try to fix everybody in a relationship in couples therapy. Hang on, I gotta plug in my headset here. It's running out of power. Okay, but the thing is that you're going to have people that are in relationships, and the neurotic person is going to be able to point at all these reasons why they're doing what they're doing because their partner is doing this stuff. Because their partner is trying to create a safe zone in which they can be kind of secure in their relationships with friends and children and things like that. Okay, and so one of the things that it's important about looking at this, okay, is you can be in situations when you're doing relationship counseling with somebody or relationship recovery with a client, and they will give you all the reasons why they did what they did because of how their partner behaved. And you need to look beyond that to attachment. Okay, you know, you need to get deeper as to what was going on in childhood. Okay, to be able to really understand why they're doing what they're doing. Okay, so this does explain why people are adventurers and protectors. It does explain their sociability. Okay, but it goes beyond that. It also explains, you know, that there are people that are not going to fit these categories. The disorganized attachment, you just got very unstable behavior patterns, and don't try to force that square peg into the round hole of sociability. Now the thing is I just point this out, is Dr. Kappas was neurotically protective. He really was. You listen to him talk about, you can't tell an emo that he can't stop his hobbies and work in his boat. You know, he would just get and make all these edicts about what the phys could and couldn't do, because that's who he was. He was a very high emo, and he had a lot of, you know, the emo was the higher evolutionary type than the phys was. There was just a lot of self-justification going on. And I think that what's also important about this, and this is hard potentially, is that to understand there were limitations of what he was doing because of this aspect of his personality, that there was a lot of self-justification going on in some of the things that he taught. So this is where the psychologist got to, and I think it's important to introduce this into our understanding of sociability. Okay, that this is the foundation of it all. And just to remind you, you know, neurotic, you got defense mechanisms, and these are the defense mechanisms: denial, acting out, projection and rationalization, displacement, reaction formation, and projective identification. Okay. And what's important is when you hear these things happening, when your client in discovery is when you comment on this, is this serving you? Is this behavior pattern serving you? And they start bringing out this stuff. Okay, you've got a neurotic is the situation where you've got a neurosis. And the rule again is always never remove a defense until an alternative is established. And what I am offering in this framework is that strength and character is a valid alternative. If you can get them to identify qualities of character that they believe that would make them prouder of themselves and more capable of responding to the world effectively, okay, that's a valid alternative. And so having gotten that established, you can then begin to move through with the rest of therapy. So confrontation with authority, this is familiar to us from stages of development, but also you have kind of neurotic categories, which are the red ones. Okay, the child is going out into the world and trying to figure out how to attract somebody like mom, so they model the father's behavior. Okay, it's also the foundation of the conscious mind, being self-aware, comparing ourselves to somebody else. Okay, and beginning to make choices about who we want to be and reason about who we are. So again, there's the assertive style of confrontation with authority, of negotiating with authority, with the father supportive. As an adult, the individual is flexible and their partner feels engaged. Yes, Steve.
When you say the child goes out, takes on the characteristics of the father to find somebody like their mother, is this true of heterosexual women who try to find a man who's like their mother?
Fundamentally, in the terms of ENP and in terms of sociability, we are always seeking our complement. The
Right.
protector is always seeking an adventure. The protector is always seeking and the adventurer is always seeking a protector.
Got it.
Okay.
I somehow
that's we're conditioned that way to very, very deep level.
Somehow I was getting away from the suggestibility and sexuality types and imagining other characteristics.
It's the same set of criteria. Okay, the only thing that I'm adding in here is to recognize that there are neurotic situations where you don't follow that rule. This is what psychology is teaching us. Okay, the over-involved mother creates a neurotically protective child. The overly protective mother creates a neurotically protective child. The overly adventurous primary caregiver, who's always going off and getting involved with everything and having all kinds of experiences and sensations, and always just at the edge of being out of control. Okay, so the overly adventurous person creates a feeling in their child that they're abandoned, and so the child, to get attention, has got to explode. So the overly adventurous primary caregiver creates a neurotically adventurous child. So the standard explanations, okay, for the emo creates a phys and the phys creates an emo, and then you get this. Ted Marino comes and says, well, it has to do with consistency and whether they do what they say they're going to do or not. And there's just all these different theories about how this happens. But what they were trying to deal with is the lack of recognition that you have normal attachment and you have neurotic attachment, and they form under completely different circumstances. And you've got to distinguish between them. So this is why this stuff is so important, is because there are exceptions to the normal rules. And they were getting themselves all wrapped around the axle trying to explain the exceptions. Attachment theory deals with that. Same thing happens with authority. Okay, you're going to follow your father, okay, unless your father goes too far. Okay, and so, for example, if you've got an impatient father, who just wants to get things done, well, the child doesn't have any agency, so they become passive. Somebody's going to do it for me. Okay, that's what they learn. So they become passive. They become protective now because they can't do anything. Okay, so things break down when you get into these neurotic situations. An overly aggressive father that always gets what they want by yelling and shouting is going to create an overly aggressive child, because that's how things get done in the world.
So when you say things break down, you mean with these neurotic parents, the adventure and protector doesn't really apply. It
The
gets beyond.
complementary relationship between mother and child, and the compatibility between father and child in terms of sociability. Okay, just staying with the terminology. In terms of sociability and the standard way of things, and the normal development, the just good enough parenting, that 60% case, okay, that most of us have as we're growing up. The child's sociability is complementary to the primary caregiver, and it's compatible or similar to the secondary caregiver. Okay,
Yeah,
that breaks down in these neurotic cases. You can't assume that. You can't look at mom and say, oh, your mom was protector, and so you're going to be an adventurer. You can't assume that, because if mom was really neurotically protective, you know, and self-involved, well, the child never got any attention, and they became neurotically protective as well. I mean, it just begins to break down. Okay, and we need to understand this. Okay, and doing counseling with people. Okay, and doing therapy with people, we need to understand that when we understand these concepts, then we see that when we've got a very high emo or a very high phys, it probably has to do with attachment issues, which takes us right into stages of development. And a very powerful tool. What was going on in your life when you were little? Give me a little bit more about what happened when you were a child. I just want to understand that, so I understand the foundations. You know, so this is diagnostic. This leads, when you get this stuff out and you see these behavior patterns, this leads you directly into stages of development. This authority issue, this is well known in stages of development. Okay, so you've got the aggressive style where the child's just watching father get his way all the time, and so being dominating is how you get what you want in the world. Okay, so that does follow. There's the passive style where the father's impatient and doesn't allow the child to do anything, just does the work for them. And the last case is passive aggressive, and this is where the child sees the father sees the child as a competitor. Okay, you know, I'm no longer having sex because you're in my life, okay, or whatever the heck it is. So the father sets up, or I really want to be playing golf. Okay, so the father sets up a task for the child to learn a skill. The child begins to do it, and then the father lands all over them and says, "Ah, you screwed it up. Let me show you how to do it." Okay, you can't do anything right. So what happens is that the child learns to go along until the father's about to intervene, and then they blow the thing up and force the father to clean up after them. They actually learn how to get revenge against the authority figure. And this follows them for the rest of their lives. This is the passive aggressive behavior pattern. And there's different strategies that Kappas goes through in the 401 videos for dealing with each of these types of personality, in terms of how you introduce them to their behavior pattern, how you get them to recognize their neurosis. And the thing that was interesting is with the passive aggressive, what he said you have to do is you have to bust them very early on, because otherwise they'll just sabotage therapy. You're an authority figure. When they get to the point where real change is going to happen, and they're going to be confronted with their challenges in life, they will simply blow it up in order to make you responsible for their failure and force you to clean up.
Is passive aggressive in the DSM-5?
I don't know. I am not a clinician. I have no clue. This is straight out of stages of development. This is straight out of the HMI curriculum.
Got it.
Okay. And so you have to tell the passive aggressive person very early in therapy, you know, I bet you, how do you deal with authority? You know, and I bet you've had this not just happen in your current situation. I bet you this has happened all throughout your life. And you've got to preempt the passive aggressive pattern, because otherwise they'll just leave therapy. And again, here, remembering always neurotic reactions are resistant to substitution of an alternative. You got to build some kind of a replacement. Okay. And there's the problem with false equivalence. Again, listen to people. If they talk about their partner and justify their behavior, well, I'm aggressive because my partner won't do anything. They're afraid to make decisions, so I have to make all the decisions. Okay, well, they're afraid because when they do make decisions, they come in conflict with this guy with this person that always needs to get their way. Okay, so it's just understanding and not and hearing that dialogue and not buying into it. Kappas is amazing in this, where he'll be interviewing a client and they'll be he's been getting the guys to question him and try to get some more information, and so they get this big self-justifying story, and they're very sympathetic to the person, and then Kappas comes out and says, time and again, it's kind of like, do you really believe that any rational person would put up with what he puts up with? It's not that simple, people. Okay, so again, this is you go through the 401 series and you see him doing this all the time. Don't buy the neurosis. Think about would a reasonable person stay in this relationship if this was really going on? Okay, so we've introduced the psychological stuff. Okay, relationship dynamics is not just about projecting yourself into the world. It's about creating space for somebody else. So I introduced the concept of nurturance and masculine and feminine types. Masculine and feminine may not be agreeable to everybody. Okay, I tend to not take them as gender categories. I see women who are very masculine, and I'm glad that they are. It's nice that people can express that, but there may be better terms, and so if people have suggestions for that, I would enjoy that as well. But now we're going to step back. So that's modern psychology. We've looked at the issue of attachment. We looked at the issue of authority. Okay. Now let's go the other way. Okay. And so when I get into this, I start talking about hristotherapy. Okay. Yes, Stephen. Or yes, Steve.
I was wondering if you'd define it. I just looked it up, and it's mentioning drugs and pagan therapy.
Okay, we'll get to that.
Okay.
We'll get to that. But before I go into this, does anybody have any questions about what we talked about so far, or any comments? Anybody else? No, this is okay. Am I doing a good job? Am I making sense? Nobody's left yet. I guess that's the evidence.
You're making sense.
Okay. So the etymology of this, we know what hypnotherapy is. We know why it is hypnotherapy. It's hypnosis, the god of sleep. And what people eventually realized is what was happening and when we were hypnotizing people was we were getting the brain balanced on the edge of the alpha theta boundary, where alpha is resting, waking, and theta is REM sleep. And so this was where Baird went with things. He eventually didn't like the word hypnos and that choice, hypnotherapy. I think that people understood that something more complicated was going on. But the Greeks also had a word called, it's Christos, which those of you who are religious will recognize. But basically what the term means is enlightened one. Okay. And so what I'm suggesting is that we're looking at a pattern of therapy where rather than trying to put people to sleep, we're trying to wake them up. Okay. Yes, Steve.
I didn't realize my hand was still up.
Oh, okay. No problem.
Sorry.
No problem. So let me just run through a little bit here about why our brain is divided. Okay. And we're going to lay some foundations in this regard to understand at the same time the chakras and why the chakras are the way that they are. So what does the brain do? And it's actually not that complicated a thing, at least in the cortex, the cerebral cortex. It's what things happen together. So I have this feeling in my arm, like sensations coming from my arm, and you know, in my hand and things like that, and I'm firing my motor control neurons in my forearm, and so you know, I'm flopping things around, and I'm just kind of waving randomly in the crib, you know, kicking my legs out and stuff like that. And it's just what things happen together. You got all this sensory interoception, uh, proprioception, nociception, you've got perception of the world around you. You've got all these signals coming in, and your brain's trying to sort out what's useful. And basically the way it does that is it figures out what things happen together. And then from there, you start to think about, how can I feel good? Okay. And over time, that includes, you know, I kind of like figuring out that, you know, when we cry, mommy will come. And so we don't scream and yell until mommy doesn't come for too long, longer than we're used to. Okay, but we learn how to signal to other people in order to get what we need. At that point in time, we can then begin to plan ahead. Okay, so I know that I want to have cake, and that feels good. But you know, if I have cake before I go out and play with my friends for 2 hours, I crash and I feel terrible. You know, I need something more than that. So we begin to understand these longer term correlations, begin to plan ahead. So this activates our rational capacities. But the highest function of the brain is building relationships. And this is based upon the fact that we won. Most animals do all these things prior to that, but the unique human condition, to a degree that no other animal has, is that our survival is based upon whether we're among enemies or friends. And so we have a huge amount of infrastructure in our brain that was built up and has been refined over the last several thousand years, which is all focused on building relationships. And this is actually the last part of the mind to really come online. But fundamentally, these higher functions are all integrate our lower functions. The other thing that's important to understand is that they feed back into our lower functions. Okay, so the reason the pendulum bob works, okay, is when you're a child, no means pushing away or slapping or spitting or whatever the heck, but there's some motion. No is indicated physically. Okay. Yes is mine or bringing towards or reaching out or whatever the heck it is. Okay. Yes, these concepts are built in us physiologically before we understand them, you know, linguistically. Oh, mommy says yes, mommy says no. Okay, and we begin to say yes or no. But what happens is that underneath, when we think yes, the reason that we're not, you know, reaching out and grabbing is because our higher social function says we need to suppress that. And so there's tension in the muscles. There's a pattern of tension in the muscles of suppressing tension. And so when you're holding that pendulum bob, when you're thinking no, you get your own personal motion based upon what the contradicting tensions, because that concept of no is tying back into that reaching or that pushing away or that hitting or whatever the heck it was. It's tying back into those circuits that was the original way that you said no. In order to say no with a word, you got to suppress that other response. That's very powerfully, deeply conditioned into you. And so that's why that thing of, you know, don't think of the answer. I'm going to ask the question. Don't think of the answer. Okay. We don't know what the answer is. Just let the pendulum move, and your subconscious will reveal it for you. That's why this works. Okay. It's because of the feedback mechanism. So what's the magic? We got 4 things going on. You got signal paths, which are the neurons, and you've got multiple inputs coming into a neuron that can either trigger or suppress the firing of the next neuron. And you've got a single output, the axon, which does branch at the far end. But on this axon, which is taking the signal to some different part of the brain or some different part of the body over a long distance, depending upon how frequently you have signals flying here, there's cells called oligodendrocytes that wrap them up with myelin. And this can improve the speed of signal flow up to 100 times. And the story I like to tell about this is, I used to play this game, Asteroids, on the Atari computer. I don't know if people remember this. It was a really Astro Smash, I guess it was. And I played 40, I got up to 40,000. I was in college when my parents bought this game. I got up to 40,000 one summer. I was really impressed with myself. And I went away to school and I came back at Christmas time, and my mother and my younger brother were playing doubles and they were up at 14 million. It was just this blur of stuff moving across the screen. I had no idea what that, but they had tuned up their visual circuits for processing, vector graphics. And they could see what was happening because the information was being processed 100 times faster. I have fathers who tell me that their kids are watching these very high speed still photo frames, and someone there, I'm sure there's a naked woman. Okay, and the fathers can't see the naked woman. They don't understand what's going on. The kids can see it. They laugh. They think it's really funny. Okay, but this is all about myelin. So to achieve excellence in sports or anything like that, it's all about myelin. And even thinking is about myelin. Your thinking speeds up when you've built up those networks. So the next stage is sensitivity, which is when the electrical impulse gets to the synapse, how likely is the signal to cross over to the next neuron? And that has to do with neurotransmitters. Okay, and if you've got enough neurotransmitter or enough receptors, it's basically the gain switch as to how big the signal has to be to cause the next cell to respond to the signal. Okay, the point that's important to understand here is that this is the only thing that they know how to do, the psychiatrist with drugs, is to change the gain. Okay, it's a very limited aspect of the overall process. And this is part of what we do, is that we do all these things together. When Kappa says hypnosis is your ideal learning state, it means that all these things are being affected. Okay. And then there's persistence, which is blood flow. Does the part of the brain that's operating, does it get enough energy, and does it get enough waste removed or not? Okay. The thing that's important about this is that in order for our brains to adapt as rapidly as they do, they recycle. So, John Galway will say, he's the world's greatest flautist, or was. He would say, if I don't practice one day before a concert, I know when I play. If I don't practice for 2 days, the critics know. And if I don't practice for 3 days, the audience knows. And that's because if you don't practice, the brain starts taking the myelin off. Okay, this isn't important anymore. We need this myelin for something else. Okay, you're doing something different today, boss. Okay, those circuits are not. We don't want to keep on investing so much energy in those circuits. You're doing something different. Okay, let's help you succeed at this new thing that you're doing. Okay. And the same thing with signal paths and everything like that. The brain and neurotransmitters, the brain reabsorbs the neurotransmitters. It very aggressively recycles everything. Okay, so if you don't use it, you lose it. Okay. Yes, Steve.
I once heard it described as being like walking through a vacant lot the same way every day. You make a path, and then if you start going a different way, the path will fill in with weeds and a new path will form.
That's a metaphor. I'm going back to, this is just a neurochemistry. So the metaphor maps to the neurochemistry pretty well. Okay. So now let's look at the logic of the chakras. So given the way that the brain works, you're this poor little infant that's been brought into the world that is no longer providing you everything that you need automatically. You got to negotiate with it. What are the problems that you have to solve? Okay. And it's really interesting that they tend to ascend along the body when you just start thinking about the problems you got to solve. The first one is you need stability and mobility. As long as you are lying flat on your back in your crib, there's very little that you can do except for by screaming. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is roll over, crawl, stand, walk. All of that involves the sacroiliac joint. Okay, the connection between the hips and the base of the spine. That's where the first chakra is. It's the first problem you have to solve. The second one is the pursuit of pleasure. Pursuing pleasure and avoiding discomfort. Okay, and that's all in the groin area. That's where elimination occurs. And if you are left with, Lauren, you're unmuted right now. Thank you. If you, just both things are in the same place, pleasure and discomfort. And if you don't get cleaned up, if you don't manage your bowel movements, if you don't control your bowel movements, then you end up being very uncomfortable. But it's also where kind of like the most primitive pleasures exist. And so now that you can move around, you're pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain. That's the next big issue. And so that's in the groin, is fundamentally where that first gets established in the early stages of your life. That's where that's why the second chakra is where it is. Third chakra is the gut, pursuit of resources. Now that you know what you want and don't want, you know that sometimes you got to have enough energy to stay awake until, mommy goes to bed, and then you can climb out of the crib and go and be in bed with her. It's just, and so you have to manage your resources in order to be able to do this. One of the big crises is you get tired and the child will sit there and just cry and cry and cry in order to prevent themselves from going to sleep. Okay, they're trying to manage their resources. And this happens in the gut. The gut is the part of your body that gives you the energy that you need and the resources that you need to grow and to play and to learn and all those things like that. So when we don't have the right kinds of stuff in our body, we collapse. And so it's the gut is the thing that tells us when we're hungry and when we need things. Okay, so that's why the third chakra is in the gut. So now that you've got your resources, okay, and you can sustain yourself for a significant period of time, you can put enough food in you to be able to go out and explore the world and do things. Well, what we begin to realize is that the heart is the most sensitive indicator to how we're doing. A dog comes and barks at us, our heart starts pounding. We don't get enough to eat, our heart doesn't feel stable inside. It begins the heart rate variability, it begins to, flutter and things like that. And this is all the heart math people focus on, this fact of our experience of life, which is that the heart rate variability, just the heart rate itself is a very sensitive indicator of how we're doing in every single moment. So once we get to this point of focusing on our wellness from moment to moment and relying upon the heart to do that, what we realize is that, we can't always get our way. And that the biggest challenge that we have in terms of conflicts with the world is how we relate to other people. And so we start focusing on self-expression. And that occurs in the throat primarily. It's the use of our words, it's explaining ourselves that all this occurs. So we begin to negotiate our relationships with other people. And the stage at which enlightenment is possible in the Vedic path is when you get to the stage of self-realization. which is, as you begin to negotiate with other people, you begin to understand what kind of a person you are, you begin to understand what kind of people they are, and you decide that, you know, I don't want to be who my parents made me any longer. I want to choose who I want to be. So what happens in the stage of self-realization, this all happens up in the prefrontal lobe. That's why the third eye is where it is. You're shifting the energy and the focus of your personality towards that self-understanding. And the reason that the chakras are the way that they are is because when you're a child, you do these first 5 stages. It's just conditioning. You just say what works. You just pay attention to your heart. You know, you just eat what's put in front of you. And you learn to like the things that your mother prepares for you, and your body learns how to use them. And so that's what you eat for the rest of your life. You know, you pursue pleasure as a matter of course. And you walk and stand and navigate the space around you with whatever competency that you were able to establish when you were in the first stage of this process. So what happens at the stage of self-realization is we go back through and we repeat and reconsider every single one of these choices from the ground up. And that's why the journey of the chakras is organized the way that it is. It's this process that we facilitate with our clients of re-examining their conditioned reactions and replacing them with chosen responses. Do I want to run away in this situation, or is it time for me to learn to stand my ground here? Okay. Should I just be concerned about sex and my romantic partner? Are there other aspects of the relationship that are important? Are the resources that I'm putting into myself and I'm acquiring for myself, are they really what I need to accomplish my goals? And how can I be well unless other people are well around me? Because I depend upon them. And so in the heuristic path, what we're talking about is, instead of just looking at these chakras, we're talking about survival, sex, exchange, trust, and healing, truth, and then the capacity to create ourselves in the way that we want to be in the world. And what the stages of development teaches us is that we can't do this alone. You can't create yourself in a situation where you're focused on, where other people around you are focused on survival, because they depend upon you being who you are. And if you change, they are at risk. They need you to be who you are. When you're in a competitive economy of exchange, where you're trading back and forth and trying to figure out how to get the most you can for whatever it is that you have, of what other people have that you want. You tell people the truth and you are going to get freaking creamed. Okay, they will just put illusions up. Yeah, I'll give you that. Give me this first, and then 2 months from now, I'll give you what you want. Yeah, right, whatever. Easy mark. Okay, happens all the time. Illusions. What's the best deal? Except for to promise somebody nothing. Get something for a promise later on for something else that never shows up. You know. So what happens is that you've got to bring other people along with you, and this is where the trust in healing thing is so important. There's a big shift that happens when you get through the heart chakra, which is you go from a zero-sum view of the world, survival, sex, and exchange, into a win-win scenario of relationship with other people. You realize that I want to change. I'm not satisfied being who I am. I'm creating lots of resistance in the people around me because we're all trying to get each other's resources, and we're all in this mode of self-protection. And so we need to change that. We need to learn to heal and trust each other. And then once we trust each other, we got to tell the truth, because to preserve trust, you got to tell people what it is that you're doing. And when they trust you, then you're able to change who you are, because they'll support you on that journey. So this is what the stages of development tells us, is you got to bring other people along with you. You can't do this alone. If you try to do this alone, you fall into isolation, you know, in that fifth stage or the sixth stage, you know, instead of having intimacy, you fall into isolation. In that seventh stage, instead of getting into generativity, you know, you end up being demoralized. And instead of finding, you know, kind of meaning in the last stage of life, you fall into despair. You know, you've got to have other people along with you on this journey. And when you get to this stage, something very interesting happens in your relationships with these people. Is you begin to share your dreams. This is something I can't prove to people that haven't experienced it, but it really begins to happen. Your dreams, instead of being kind of these vague metaphors and chaotic images, it's like there's somebody in your dream with you and you're doing something together. And this is the thing that happens when you finally get through this point of self-realization, is you go into the crown chakra, which is about moral maturity. And that's where the critical mind dissolves. You no longer need to protect yourself from your society. You and the people around you are fully committed to each other's fulfillment. And in dreams, you plan everything out ahead of time, and you hear what the concerns are, and you try to compensate. You try to plan ahead and make sure that those people that are feeling disconnected by the changes that are coming have time and resources. Maybe they need to go back and find another community, and you prepare them. You help them to find that community. Okay, you support each other. So this is the heuristic path in the way that I understand it. This is how I describe it to my clients. And it correlates pretty well with the stages of development. It's just a different take. It correlates with the chakras, if you understand the chakras and why the chakras are the way that they are. And why the Vedic path is, unless you're up on that point of self-realization, you can't do the chakras. If you're down in the gut level in your life, you haven't gone past that, you don't have the resources to be able to reconsider the choices that you've made, or the conditioning that you've adopted in your earlier life. You can't do it. You don't have the resources. It's why it's all, that whole tradition is organized the way that it is. You've got to go through and re-examine all those choices you've made and choose the ones. Let go of the ones that no longer serve you and choose the ones that do. So that's this picture here that I offer in the theory of mind. This also ties, and when I do the theory of mind presentation, what I'm saying is that one of the reasons I modified the theory of mind is because it shouldn't just be seen as a tool for overload. There's a lot of truth in it. Okay, it should be the foundation of all of our psychoeducation. And so, sociability and nurturance should be visible in this drawing, that the heuristic path should be visible in this drawing. Everything should come back to the theory of mind. Everything should be consistent and hang consistently on it. So this is the picture of that seventh stage, which is the critical mind is dissolved. We've got sex and our survival instincts under control in the service of expressing our virtues in society, and negotiating our individuality, and having found a group of people that accept the vices that we need in order to preserve our sense of self. That's a negotiation that we do to be able to have time to be who we are. And we use discernment, dignity, and integrity in the thinking part of our mind in order to inform all of our choices. Yes, Steve?
If the critical mind dissolves, what protects the subconscious mind from unwanted suggestions, and what protects the conscious mind from being flooded with more than 9 chunks of information?
The loving witness of your peers.
You lose me here. I don't know what you're talking about.
You can't do this alone. The thing that stabilizes you is the loving witness of your peers. You're getting overloaded. This is too much for you. Go off and take some time and be by yourself, because we need you. We need the best of you here with us. We're depending upon you. Okay? They don't push you too hard. They recognize that you have limits. And you do the same for them. You do the same for them.
Yeah, see, I'm seeing, the critical mind as an important factor of how the brain works. And you're saying it dissolves, it's gone. And I don't see that, love from friends and family is going to solve this basic, what sounds like a basic, misfunction of the brain.
That's the whole proposition of the theory of mind. Okay, in the way that I formulate it, which is that the reason that the critical mind forms is to protect you from social deception, to protect you from things that people tell you, which they tell you to get you behave in the way that benefits them rather than the way that benefits you. So that's why the critical mind forms. There's other aspects of this. I told the story about when I was playing basketball and I was in 2nd grade and I was shooting layups and practicing my layups. My friend was practicing dribbling with both hands. And these older boys came up to us, and one of them, the one in the middle, points at my friend and says, "This is my stupid little brother. He still believes in Santa Claus." And the poor kid just he grabbed the ball in his hands and he froze in complete panic. Mommy and Daddy lied to me? Or is my brother, who's older and knows the world so much better than I do, is he lying to me right now? Look at these people, they agree with him.
So he was experiencing cognitive dissonance.
He had a deep psychological crisis at that point in time.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is why the critical mind evolves. It's to slow things down. You go home and you talk to the people that you trust to care for you. You dream about it. You don't change your behavior right away.
Right, but if it dissolves, you're not converting everybody in the world that you ever come in contact with into a loving person whom you can trust. You're still going to get a lot of
no. It's just that what ends up happening is that you feel that coming from 10 miles and 6 months ahead of time. The experience of life when you get up to this point is completely different. You feel it coming way ahead of time, and you either choose not to be there, or you choose to use your resources to direct that energy someplace else. Okay, and there's a whole community of people doing this with you. This transition, what I'm saying is that that gamma state, which master meditators, what typically happens here is people go into a monastery or a convent or something like that, And they have this community of people that they are all focused on renunciation of self to some higher set of principles, which basically are very moral principles, principles of moral action. And they harmonize their social environment with their community. And they end up being in this gamma state, which means that all of the networks of the brain are myelinating to be in perfect synchronization and to work faster and faster, because the critical mind is no longer there tripping up the interconnects. And so the brain ends up working 3 to 10 times faster than it does in the beta state. The brain just works way faster, okay? Because that myelination begins to integrate everything. You can't get there as long as the critical mind is there. You just can't do that. It breaks up the process. It breaks up the process of integrating your thinking patterns. But you can't do it alone either. You've got to be with people that you really trust. So the other way that people go about doing this is they fight and claw their entire life, and then they withdraw from the world. And this is what we get sold by the investment planners, okay, which is that, you know, we want to set money aside so that when you retire, you can do the things that you really want to do, okay? And have, whether it's, you know, starting a ceramics studio or something like that, that now is your chance in retirement. Once you have enough money that you can actually withdraw from the world. Okay, well, the problem is by the time you get to that point, you've already done so much damage to your brain by subjecting it to anxiety and stress that you got to heal a whole bunch of stuff before you can actually begin to tune the networks. This doesn't work, or it's very difficult. But that's what people would do, is they would literally, that was a term that people used to use in talking about retirement, about withdrawing from the concerns of the world. And it wasn't getting senile, it was just choosing not to be bothered anymore. Okay, but the thing, so I recognize that we're talking about a big leap here. The fact of the,
I mean, it sounds wonderful, but I still don't understand the two questions I asked you. It seems
what happens is that your
conscious and subconscious is necessary.
No, but not if your friends tell you the truth always. And when you get hurt, if they commit to healing you, you're only got this split to protect yourself, because you assume that you're going to be abandoned and left alone, lying bleeding on the side of the road after you've gotten run over. So you need to prevent bad things from happening to you. But the whole point of Buddhism is don't suffer. Don't let the fact that bad things have happened to you determine who you are. Pain is just a signal from the world that something has to change. Go and figure out what has to change, and find people that are willing to walk that road with you. Okay, and use that as a criteria as to who you associate with.
But without a critical mind, how do you protect yourself from logical fallacies, from a narcissistic psychopath? How do you keep lies, because you're not always around the people you trust? The way
that you do that is the narcissistic megalomaniac walks up to you and starts talking to you, and you feel it right here. Your heart starts pounding. You're integrated, okay? Again, part of the reason why you've got this problem about not being able to discern is because the mechanisms of your body, which are supposed to tell you when this is not a trustworthy person, this is a predator who's going to eat you, even though they're saying all these wonderful things, their intention is to eat you. You're not hearing those signals. You're not hearing those signals because the critical mind is in the frickin' way. Okay, so I'm sorry to get a little bit loud here. Maybe I get too excited about this, but the thing is that it's the disintegration is a stopgap measure until you develop discernment and you learn dignity and integrity, and you build the community around you of people that will care for you and protect you and heal you when you're hurt. That's actually our job, is to be those people. That's what our clients are paying for. Yes, Isabella.
Okay, the two things that come to mind is what you're talking about. The way I interpret it is creating conscious community.
Mm-hmm.
Is where everybody goes in and agrees on certain fundamentals.
Right.
And the other thing that comes to mind is the way, again, I'm understanding this is intuition. This is a high degree of intuition, which I did not see on your chakra diagram, but really the way I've learned it, that it lives in the sixth chakra.
Yeah, you begin to have the breakdown of the barriers between personalities in the sixth chakra. Okay, and so you begin to have intuitions. You get messages from people without them telling you things.
Yeah.
Your hearts are bonded together. Okay, and you know when somebody's in trouble. You feel it. Mothers feel this. You know, the surrender of the mother to her child. And there are many mothers. I think one of the most terrible things science has done to women is they have caused them to disavow these awarenesses they have for their children. And I think that this is part of what makes women such effective politicians, is those that hold on to those intuitions are far more sensitive to what's going on in the world than men are. You know, men tend to be aggressive. They look at the way the world is and they say that this is the way people need to be, and they get these freaking theories about economic systems and crap like that, which are all about efficiency, but have nothing to do with sustainability, you know, or sustainability or resilience. They're very fragile systems, you know, and women tend to feel that happening. They feel that it's not working. They begin to feel at the edges that there are people that are in pain. This is not going well, and we need to pay attention to those people. Okay, and men have difficulty doing that. There are men that get to that point, and there's a male path to that. But you know, maternity is just, you know, it's kind of both a blessing in that sense of having that sensitivity. It's also a curse in the sense that now you just get busted open, you know, through that process. And when the world sets out to hurt your children, if the world's more powerful than you, you're just in confrontation with this unstoppable destructive force all the time, and you become very, very anxious. So but I think that this is a very important aspect of the feminine character. And it's why, you know, when a lot of spiritual men say that men need to find their inner feminine, they need to contact that. It's that sensitivity. It's not just being the masculine, this is what the world needs. It's actually bearing witness to the world, saying, is this really working? Is life improving for the vast majority of people or not? Or is this just satisfying my desire to have more? This is just self-justification. This theory is just self-justification. It's that thing that Galbraith said. Am I just seeking a superior moral justification for selfishness? So yes, it does happen in the sixth chakra as the personality begins to dissolve. Okay, one of the things that happens up in the crown chakra is that you begin to understand that you're not just negotiating with other people, that you're negotiating with ideas, you're negotiating with spirits, you're negotiating with animals and trees, and you know, one of the things that people say about when you reach enlightenment is your will goes anywhere and enters into everything, because you are no longer resisted. And that's why so few people get up there, is that survival and sex and exchange, those are very, very hard habits to fully and completely cast off. And particularly when you're in a situation where your romantic partner is such an important part of getting through to stage 6. Sex is something that's very difficult to discipline. You know, it's just really beautiful when you're getting up into that stage, and to say that no, we can't do that right now because there's some part of reality reaching in that needs our attention, and we need to focus over there right now. To surrender yourself to service to the rest of reality. Okay, that's a real struggle. So that conversation that I was having with Lauren earlier on applies right here. Okay, it's really committing yourself in that 7th stage to being aware that you are an instrument that is used by reality to reorganize itself in harmonious configurations. And you don't always get to choose when you do things, even if they feel good to you. There are times when you need to pay attention to something that's just more important than you are. Because if you don't, it's going to hurt a lot of other people. So it's a very complex state. And this is why Buddha did what he did. You know, why he left his palace, went out in the world and did what he did was because he felt other people and understood that there was a lot contingent upon this. It was an act of service. So one of the things that happens is that as therapists, we need to recognize where we are in this process. Most of us are up in that point of self-realization, and we're doing this work of re-examining ourselves. But there are therapists who haven't gotten there yet. Okay, you hear about therapists that have sex with their patients or their clients. Okay, they're just not there yet. You have therapists that want to make lots of money. That's the primary consideration, finding somebody that's willing to pay them a lot of money. Okay, so everybody's at a different level. We just need to be conscious, because we can typically work down. It's really hard to work up. What usually is happening when you're working up is that your client is doing therapy on you. Okay, it's just recognizing that that's happening. All right. So the only other thing that I would add in terms of facilitating this process, okay, so one thing is it's just presenting it to the client that this is, and I obviously believe in this. You don't have to present the whole thing if it doesn't all ring true for you, if it doesn't make sense to you, if it's not who you are, you don't feel that you can actually facilitate the process. Okay. Being who I am, I'm very confident of my ability to facilitate all of this, and my clients find it to be very, very attractive. But there's an evolution of the self-concept that goes on in this process as well, in the mind. We start off when we ask a child, what did you want to be when you grow up? And they say, I want to be a fireman. I want to be a veterinarian. I want to be a teacher. I want to be president, whatever it's what they do. And so their literacy is a practical literacy about how things get done in the world. And this is obviously the first concern of childhood, to be able to do things. Go a little bit on down the road. I want to be happy. I want to be proud. You get into this feeling is where your self-concept is. And you can't be able to negotiate your feelings if you can't articulate what you're doing and negotiate with other people about what you're doing. You're going to have conflict. You're going to have disappointed expectations all the time and cognitive dissonance. Okay, to get to this stage, you've got to have practical literacy. And this is where a lot of focus in the psychotherapeutic world is right now, is emotional intelligence, emotional literacy. Getting people whose parents didn't get them beyond the doing. You know, if the dishes aren't in the dishwasher at this time, you're going to get a spanking, or you're going to be grounded for a week. You know, if there's no emotional dialogue, it's all based upon practical doing things. This is where a lot of psychotherapy is right now. It's developing emotional literacy. What I'm saying is that as you get into the later stages of the chakra development of the heuristic path, as I've named it, you're getting into issues of being. How do I want to be? What values do I want to manifest? What virtues do I want to manifest in the world? And so your literacy is moral literacy. And remember, this is the last part of the brain to develop. And this is the thing that is concerned with who you are in relationship to other people. Your medial prefrontal or your prefrontal cortex is where you do moral reasoning. And when you get to this up into relationships that are stable and mutually rewarding, you now no longer have to have to be able to reinforce all of the cascading, reinforcing chains of the layers of your personality. Okay, remember, every layer builds on the next and feeds back into and reinforces the layers below. Okay, so what happens is that this self-concept sits at the top of your personality, and you can be honest in any situation. You can be compassionate in any situation. And so now you are anchoring everything else beneath you. So when we retire and can no longer do the things that we did with the people that we did, we don't suddenly collapse and lose all of our skills. We don't lose our sense of purpose, because we can find some other place to be honest. We can find some other place to be passionate and committed. And we actually, knowing that that's who we want to be, our subconscious, our reticulating activating system is going about looking for opportunities for us to do that, instead of pining away about how we can't do what we used to do. Saying, now I'm free. Now I can do this in some other place. I can pick the place I want to do this. I don't have to be worried about making money anymore. I can be who I want to be. So post-retirement is a great time to get people engaged. I've had a great deal of frustration with that. You know, we have a lot of there's a lot of assets in the senior community right now in the area where I'm at, and they're just enjoying themselves. You know, they're done with growth. You know, they want to go on cruises and things like that. So but there's this beautiful opportunity for people in that stage of life to actually move along those last two stages of the Vedic, of the chakra journey. And they just aren't convicted that it's not part of their literacy. Moral literacy is not part of their way of thinking about themselves. They think about doing and feeling. So this is a challenge, okay, as I see it, in terms of manifesting this. You've got to shift your clients to a moral dimension of literacy. You get them to think about their virtues, their vices, okay, and think about the virtues and vices of the people around them, and understand the complementarity, you know, and think about, am I investing in the right kind of people? You know, getting them up to this level of understanding. And if they don't have the emotional sense, they don't have the sense of connection to other people, it's very difficult to do this. So there's this very important point of just being aware of where your client is in this journey of literacy. And currently a lot of the focus is on the emotional area. Okay, so we at 10 o'clock yet? Oh, wow. Okay, I got to 9 o'clock, and that's the last view graph. Yes. Okay, so self-improvement is personality change. I don't know if I've simplified suggestibility, but it doesn't necessarily make therapy simpler.
This is your definition of simplify.
I simplified suggestibility.
Oh, because it seems to me you've broken it down.
I've added a whole bunch of other concepts.
Explained it in more detail.
I wouldn't say it's simplified. I would say it's redefined.
No, I've re-signified. I've introduced a bunch of terms which aren't suggestibility. I replaced this broad, complex idea of suggestibility with something simpler. And I said, how are we going to deal with all the stuff that was in that confusing mix? There's some stuff that was left out. And so I brought in a bunch of other terms. I'm hoping that what I've been able to convey to you is why I picked the terms that I did. Okay.
And I did want to know what heuristic means.
Heuristic is basically it's just again it's it's an adjective that I made from Hristos.
Okay. No wonder I can't find a definition.
No, that's right. This is all just Brian making up as he goes along. You know, it's the Monty Python show. Okay. but the thing is that what I'm trying to get at is that I found this dialogue with the instructors at HMI to be really frustrating. Okay. Which is, you know, they make these statements and then you ask them why, and it's just like, oh, well, everybody gives you a different answer. Okay, they have their own way of understanding it. And so yes, but what I've done is I've said that instead of just making something up, I went back and I said, look, you go to the psychologists, and this is what they understand about this stuff. And this stuff is well established. It's solid. It's rock solid. Okay, they've been doing these studies for 20 years now. And HMI just never brought it in. The stuff about authority, we already know about. They don't teach about neurotic behavior in HMI. It used to be part of what, it used to be in the 401 series. He would talk about neurotic behavior. It's there in the defenses, okay? But and then bringing the chakras in and explaining the chakras why they are. And about how this becomes, now we've got at the end of the chakra journey, you're healing the divide of the mind so that people experience life with the fullness and passion and vivacity of childhood. If you don't think that the mind wants to be reunited, when the way that my clients respond to the suggestion, okay, is just very, very powerful. There's just the subconscious is just, yes, please, yes, this is way too much freaking work. And it hurts us because we're not communicating. We need to soften this barrier. We need to let more stuff through. And once it begins to soften, your relationships improve and the barriers in other people's minds soften. You eventually, as a group, you just decide, wow, we're just wasting our time with this stuff. This is just a bunch of wasted energy. Okay, let's not worry about this any longer. You know, we know that we can trust each other. So again, the statement about conscious community, it's a very familiar concept. It's what most religions are actually in their foundational stage, what they're trying to do. When you hear people talk about the Holy Spirit and stuff like that, that's the experience. It's one of absolute trust, you know, because you see right into people's minds and hearts. Nothing is hidden from you any longer. You know, there's just this crazy story in the book about what the apostles do. I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's like, you know, it was a communist society. And if you were going to join the Christian community, you had to give everything to the community, hold nothing back. And there's this couple that was, you know, thinking about joining the community, and they're kind of like, you know, I don't know whether we should really give them everything. I mean, we have a lot of stuff. We can give them like 95%, and we'd still have 5% left over. And if it doesn't work out for us, we can go back and we can live out in the community. It's Acts is what it's called. So what ends up happening is that they go up in front of Peter, and there's this ceremony, and they're being brought into the community. And he asked them, and And were you certain to give everything to the community? And they fall down dead in the spot. And the common interpretation is that he smoked them. Okay. My sense is they just died of shame, because everybody in the community that was there to welcome them looked and saw the truth of the fact that no, they didn't trust the community.
Sounds
care
like
for
Jim Jones type of stuff to me.
No, I mean, this is talked about. This is something that the Japanese talk about, this octopus heart thing, which is that when somebody has a real shock, a real emotional shock, the heart actually goes into defibrillation. There's such a powerful muscular contraction that it can't unstick itself and keep on beating, and they drop dead in the spot. This is a known physiological function, the physiological reaction to a severe shock. It happens to people. They call it octopus heart or something like that in the Japanese. Okay. So it, it's that kind of a situation. It's just a very different experience of life when you're in that kind of a place. What happened in Jonestown was that Jim Jones adopted all these people who were really fragile personalities. These were people that had serious traumas in their childhoods. And he thought that he could hold them all in his mind and his heart. And what happened was he was losing it, breaking down, because these people couldn't manage themselves when he wasn't there. And so, that to me, it's kind of the same thing with David Koresh, is that there are people who really take on more than they can chew and really set out to save other people. And then they get themselves in this situation where, like, I can't do this anymore. And what's going to happen to these people if I send them away? It's going to be a disaster for them. So you end up with these crazy, these insane seeming choices that have to do with people just believing that they could be God, and they can't be. So, in terms of that metaphor, there are risks here, and you need to understand. We need to understand where we're going with this, and you don't try to lift somebody up from the first chakra concerns up to fifth chakra concerns in one fell swoop. It doesn't work. They got to go through the intermediate layers. One of the things that we could do a much better job of as a society is understanding this, okay, and facilitating this. And that's again part of why I'm proposing this. I find, again, my clients find it very attractive, at least the ones that are kind of up at getting to stage 4 and stage 5, and really ready to do self-reflection. Okay, reaching for that stage. They find this to be very attractive. It also helps people that are in that stage 3, where their relationship is not working and their heart's beginning to break, and they're realizing that it's them as much as the other person, and they want to get into stage 4, and they see, okay, this is the way forward. This is the way forward. Okay, I can see this makes sense. I can take all the knowledge that I have of the person that I'm in the relationship with, that I used to hurt them, and their knowledge that they used to hurt me, and we can turn this around and we can heal each other instead. And let's just believe that that can happen, and let's just walk forward on that path. And if I can't make it happen, then the relationship's over and I need to find a different partner. But I need to make this attempt. I need to commit to trying to do this, because I recognize that I'm just as much at fault as the other person. And that's a very beautiful moment in therapy for me as well, as for people who recognize this and see it in themselves. But then beyond that is these other stages, the other steps. It doesn't stop with that. You now enter into these other aspects in your partnership with your loved one. That's very, and so it's this ongoing journey of personal growth. All righty. Any other questions?
Not for me. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Lauren, did you have anything?
No, thank you. That was really amazing.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing that I'm thinking too is Maslow's hierarchy of needs sounds also very similar.
Yes, yeah, there is a lot of similarity, and um
And we don't have to take a lot of time on it. I just want to
yeah,
mention
yeah.
that.
You know, there's another framework that I have, which is a framework of power, which has got a lot of similarities to this as well, which is another view of things, which in the corporate world is very, very powerful for people to understand certain kinds of political transitions in the corporate world, and it's more narrowly focused. I'm not a consultant in those kind of political or corporate dimensions. So this is what I present to the people that I do personal therapy with. But what I find is, just like with stages of development, there's correspondences between all of these things. Yeah. So, but there are other ones, you're right. Any other comments, anyone?
All right, thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you all for participating and for allowing me to share this with people. It's been a wonderful experience for me. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and I'm so grateful to have had as many of you show up as did. And I will continue. I've got plans to do a presentation on suggestibility next. I'm sorry, on desensitization next. But I plan on, after that one, and on beginning to do the cycle again and going back to the theory of mind and repeating this. So, you know, as I post them up on the hypnosis workshops and practice, whatever the heck it is, if you would just put any comments on the event and let people know that you found it to be valuable, that would be very helpful. And I may reach out to you to get to send you a link. I'm working on a SEO push, and my partner in that wants me to try to get more recommendations on Google. So I may reach out to you just to ask you to put something up about the presentation. That would be helpful to me in terms of marketing my practice. So everyone have a wonderful night.
You too, Brian.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Brian.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. You too.